When you asked me this question, I did think of a mental blank the size of a life. I was like, there's nothing. There is not even the names of my children, because he's asked me if there's anything in there. So the answer is nothing at all, just deep space, emptiness. You know, like when you do a meditation app and you suddenly are like, yes, there's nothing there. I'm in that constantly. But then, of course, you start thinking, oh, what is there? And you like tap the back of your head and you're like, sitting on my front step thinking of a plan, and you're like, oh yeah, it's mainly 90s hip hop. But yeah, there is some poetry there, and there is some sort of turns of phrases there, and then we'll get on to what I've chosen, my desert island sentence. Yeah,
that's Max Porter. He's the author of 4 perfect little gems of novels, novellas almost. His debut, Grief is the Thing with Feathers, is about a Ted Hughes scholar and his 2 sons dealing with the loss of their wife and mother, as well as the intrusions of a large crow that has come to stay. He followed it with Lanny, impossibly somehow even richer and stranger and more heartrending, about a boy who goes missing and the chorus of the town who are searching for him, and art and innocence and ancient timeless nature and parenthood and so much more. Then came his bonkers, loving, horrified portrait of an artist in The Death of Francis Bacon, and finally his most recent book, Shy, about a troubled teenage boy facing his last chance. Max Porter is a true original. Compassionate, smart, spiky and funny, and I don't believe for a second that he ever approaches a question with an empty brain. 90s hip-hop? Absolutely. But emptiness? From Max Porter? I don't think so. From Schwartz Media, I'm Michael Williams, and this is Read This, a show about the books we love and the stories behind them. In case you can't tell already, I love Max Porter's work. I was lucky enough to interview him a few years ago and was in awe of his brain and his words. Properly starstruck. So when thinking about writers who might join us to share their life sentences, he sprang immediately to mind. When we say life sentences, we're talking about a pretty straightforward premise. The idea that for all of us, there are phrases, mantras, earworms, random quotes even, that form part of our personal and professional lives, that follow us around when we're daydreaming at traffic lights or spur us on when we're facing that existential dilemma. Sometimes they're profound, sometimes they're just the flotsam and jetsam of the brain. And in the case of someone like Max Porter, sometimes they're an insight into a creative process. You strike me as a writer who, amongst your many gifts, I think one of the beautiful things about your books is the role that voice plays in them and the role that kind of fragmentary voice plays in them. The way that character and worlds and deep feelings are kind of conjured up with little juxtapositions of words and little repeated phrases. And so it seemed to me likely that you, Max Porter, are a man who carries some phrases around with you in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, no, what's funny about me is that I'm an immensely musical person. I listen to music all day. I write musically. As you say, my books are polyphonic juxtapositions of found phrases. But maybe because of a result of my teenage years, I have a terrible memory for language. And even weirder, I don't actually listen to lyrics. I write lyrics for people, and I love to read lyrics, and I am obviously as haunted as the next person is by good quality writing in music and elsewhere, and in the lyric poetry particularly. But I don't really listen to song lyrics. It's really odd.
It's just background noise.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the time people will be like, that's one of my favourite songs, I know it off by heart. And I couldn't sing you the whole of Mr. Bojangles. I just don't know the words. It drives my wife mad.
I mean, your work is suffused with kind of conversation with earlier writers and earlier voices. When you were first identifying as a reader, did phrases jump out at you as distinct from, I mean, clearly you didn't learn them rote the way some people do, but was it language that captured you, or was it the kind of ideas and you didn't hear the lyrics?
I feel like I've always been an immensely physical reader. I'm not at the mathematical end of the spectrum of sort of writers that can control the complexities of plot or narrative arc. I'm at the drum circle end of things. I'm from the oral tradition, so I read like a hungry person looking for what is edible, or like a blindfold person walking through a house looking for a safe path forward. So I read and read, and then I wait for the thing to hit me, to land. So it's not that I necessarily can remember those things then, but I certainly remember the feeling. Like, so I remember how I felt when I read Hughes for the first time, or Dickinson, or when some of the brilliance of Shakespeare was explained to me, or indeed, when I first listened to Nina Simone or Gorecki, I remember that landing like Tetris. The universe clicks into place within me because of a certain insight or epiphany offered to me by the quality of what I've heard or engaged with. It's like a nerve or a register that is ready to be activated, and when it is activated, you're flooded with this sort of gratitude, obviously, but also something to do with the appetite, something to do with a kind of spurring on, a forwardness to that another human being has discovered in you this thing that you couldn't articulate or didn't have a name for. And the reason I've chosen the sentence that I've chosen, which we'll get onto, is because that happens every single time I think about or read that sentence. Its power renews itself like a rechargeable battery. The more I contemplate that sentence, the wilder it becomes. So it's like a sort of articulation of my quest in life,
How much is that experience that you're describing a generative one? Like, how much do you get that feeling and then want to either reproduce it or want to create it for others when you feel it?
Totally. It's a 100%. It is the generative thing. I'm like what's it called? I'm like a parasite, yeah. So I come out of an exhibition roaring with the desire to paint. I put down a book I love and want to go and play with language. That's what it's all about for me. I need to be knocked around or knocked back or shown my own appetites or potential for innovation in the work of others, yeah. And I can do it for myself. If you lock me in a cell with no books, I will do it using my imagination, using my remembrance of encounter, be it with language or spiritual things or whatever. But yeah, that's a really beautiful question, because that's exactly the effect it has on me. And that's why I perform my books live, because what I want is for everybody in the room to be infected with or take from me or be given a sort of permission from my work to go and do the thinking or the feeling for themselves.
Max Porter, what's your life sentence you brought to us today?
Well, do you want the fun one or the serious one?
Start with the serious one and then we'll finish on the fun one.
So my serious one is this, as I said to you, I don't memorize poetry particularly well. I probably could if I tried. I have seen people recite their poems and felt that it is one of the greatest skills on earth. I talk about this all the time. I saw Alice Oswald recite Memorial at the Edinburgh Festival 10 or 15 years ago, and I have never been more impressed with a human being. I've never thought that the human being was cooler than when Alice Oswald read for 91 minutes her Iliad poem, and all you could see was just a slight tapping of the foot and a clutching of the thing, and out came this litany of Trojan dead. It's just mad. And so I'm sort of ashamed that I can't remember things, and I carry that around a bit like the shame of only being able to speak one language. Anyway, when I first read this line by Emily Dickinson, I felt the land bridge in my soul connect. I felt like tectonic plates moving within me, and it felt like an opportunity to be in love with language for the rest of my life, and that language and the human brain working hand in hand could achieve a godlike power on earth, like a momentary spiritual betterment or miraculous, something miraculous, I guess is what I'm saying. And it won't have that effect for everybody. You have to find your own line, right? I don't know what it was about this. Anyway, the line is, and I use it in the epigraph for my first book, that love is all there is all we know of love. It is enough. The freight should be proportioned to the groove. And I read it and I was like, wow, that love is all there is all we know of love. That's that's really big, and that needs me to do some thinking about what she means there, and then I sort of think, wow, that is really, really complex and fits into various different categories of thinking about faith and human capabilities, and so I just love it. And then the way that she then says that it is enough, that is such a radical proposition. That is as big an idea as faith, right? The idea that people that are like crassly atheistic and just take the piss out of people of faith as if they believe in a made-up God have so missed the point of what faith is, right? And I say this as as an agnostic, but I do think it is so extraordinary to posit that relationship between everything we can possibly know of a thing and the thing itself in action. That reckoning, that dialogue between the entity itself and our capacity to understand the entity is enough, is a life's work, is all love, death, all shagging, all money, all corruption, all kicking dogs on the street, all building boats. It's all in that, I think, is brilliant. And then that the freight should be proportioned to the groove. Because that's her genius for me, is that suddenly a physical image lands in my mind of a thing that fits. But what is the freight and what is the groove, and how has the groove been made, and how does the freight adapt in the way I love my children, or in the way I read, or my ambition as a look at the attention I pay things will always grow, and the freight will always find its perfect groove if my framework is love. And I just think it's symphonic in its complexity, but in its beauty as well. It's like, to me, it sounds the most stunning note. I'd say it's like the tuning fork that is hit and reverberates through everything I do now. And that we are able to find those things for ourselves, and that it might be one of 100, 200 things like that operate in my mind. What a joy. What an absolute joy, And that she's able to pass that on. And so when people come to me and say that comparable effect has been had from a line of mine, I just think, well, this is it. Perhaps in this kind of mycelial network of human beings having ideas, and some voicing them and some writing them down, or some choosing painting or poetry or dance or sport or whatever to voice these recognitions, these grabs at understanding, that creates this huge web, this life support system from which we can all drink. It's just so humbling and incredible.
The other thing about that Dickinson line, and about the way it sits with you and the way you can revisit it again and again in life and in love and in creativity, is that for all it's deeply thoughtful and profound, it's a fixed point, but one that opens itself up rather than closes itself off.
Exactly. And it doesn't dictate the terms of its own interpretation. To me, one of the sort of formative things that ever happened to me in my life, I was playing clarinet when I was a kid. And my teacher took me to a jazz improvisation day, and I wasn't good enough. I'd only been playing the clarinet for a little while, and she was like, don't worry, you'll be fine. And we were in a room. So the guy would play a chord or whatever on his piano, and then everyone would go around and they'd have their 16 bars to improvise. And it got round to me, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm panicking. And she's just like, just sound it out, man. Just sound out the one note. Just open up your instrument. And so, there were these guys being like, and I just went, for 16 bars. And it was rad. And everyone was like, yeah, man. And I was a little 10-year-old boy in a room of adults, and she just gave me that Dickinsonian, she's like, don't worry about the machinations of man. Don't worry about competition and virtuosity and all those things. You have a thing that makes a note. Blow the note. And I think that's what that Dickinson fragment does, as do many of her fragments, as do fragments of Keats and Sappho and Anne Carson and whatever. That's the point. You find the fragment for you. But for me, that's what it does, is it's a very simple motif played humbly on a piano, and out of it flows every possibility.
And it is enough.
It's enough.
We'll be right back. Max Porter's enthusiasm for literature and for art in general is utterly contagious. As he's mentioned already, live performance of his work is something he embraces. Last time I interviewed him, he read a passage from Lanny, and honestly, the voice work he did was worthy of Monty Python. Play and performance are a big part of his process, but so too is collaboration.
I said rather wankily in an Irish newspaper recently, it's my raison d'etre. I really I'm really addicted to it. I'm smitten with it. Everything I do at the moment is with others, through others. I'm uncomfortable on my own, and the only reason I would now work on my own is to get enough of a thing done that I can take it out and knock it against other people or feed it through someone else's machine. In fact, my next work, the novel I want to write in a year or two's time, my sort of big serious book, will be a solitary thing, and I'm fearful of it, because for me the collaboration is about taking the work profoundly seriously as a communal activity, and taking yourself in that ecosystem much less seriously. And I think in that you make the best work, and you learn, and other people learn from you. So there's a sort of orrery of creative exchange and generosity that spins out of anybody's control and becomes a completely new thing. So yeah, I with musicians, actors, artists, I'm just completely in love with what it's taught me, and with the surprise of finding something new. And also I love to share risk, and I actually love as well to share success. I love to share a breakthrough with someone. Like, if I've done something that I think is good, I've only got myself to think I've made progress, and then to discover that a reader or a prize jury or a critic fundamentally disagree with me and think I've written a load of shit. So there's this sort of boredom for that, for me, in the literary model. Whereas with the collaborating, it's like you say to one another, there's something here, or this is working, or we made good work, or we made work that didn't quite land, but it was interesting to try it. Like, that to me is a higher editorial model, is progress,
What does it mean, though, for having a sense of completion with an artwork? A moment when it's finished. I mean, your books aren't closed objects because of that process you describe. You and Cillian Murphy go and approach Grief is a Thing with Feathers, and it becomes a completely different work. The live performances around Shy that you've been doing. Again, the book is a kind of object, but the work transcends that fixed point. Does it mean that you never feel like your books are finished?
Yeah. And I didn't know that at the time, but I wrote that. The last line of Grief is a Thing with Feathers, everything unfinished, beautiful, is carrying on. It's the market that finishes it. It's never the artist. The gallerist packs up the painting and flogs it, and the publisher packages up the book and sells it. We're never done. And I think anyone that thinks they're done has bought into the economic imperative of that particular art form too wholly. Like, I wrote a film in lockdown for Cillian, and we put it on at Manchester International Festival, and it's work we're really interested in and proud of. It's nowhere near done. We want to do it from the other side. We want to do it as a diptych with another piece. We want to perform it live with an orchestra. It doesn't matter whether any of these things ever happen. The point is that the work is set up as a question machine for how we feel in this life, in these bodies. It's a piece about guilt and masculinity and shame and apocalyptic environmental feeling and stuff like that. To say that, yeah, done that, tick, would be mad. So yeah, I mean, these are the things that interest me. These are things I'll take to my novel about a Victorian politician. These are things that I'll take back inside when my kids get home from school and try and engage them with. It's never done.
I mean, I love that sense of play, that sense of kind of joy that comes from creativity, about exploration. But the other impulse that seems to me to be omnipresent in your work is around your characters, and it's about a kind of love and a kind of tenderness and protectiveness of your characters. Shy is a prime example of this. And I'm curious about whether you're a writer who feels a sense of responsibility to your creations that makes a constantly unfinished space feel stressful.
Maybe. I'm a 20th century baby, right? And I'm a nuclear obsessed baby, and I a lot of the fiction I was raised reading was a sort of killing field, really, because it felt it ought to be. It was the question of, can we write poetry again after the Holocaust? And there was this sort of sense that the novel is a tool of our pushing at how the abstracted reality of the living person in the novel do they have a real consciousness, or are they a statistic, and can we slash them and burn them and take voyeuristic pleasure in their harm? And I think, therefore, I suppose I was more interested in the kind of, I think I'm interested in tenderness as a force. And so I am, my critics, particularly on the right, would always posit this as a facet of my sentimentality. But for me, it's sort of the opposite. It's a sort of refusal to buy into pre-existing modes of denial about what violence actually means, or loss or death actually mean, and actually investigate them, and then come out the other side and decide, sort of pro-choice, that you hug the teenage boy in need, or you celebrate the pain that is within you following the death, or you find the missing child actually or imaginatively. A refusal to buy into the kind of economy of pain being visited upon another. I think about it a lot, and I have a kind of conflict within me that is my critical brain thinking right, interesting, good books, write hard, dark, difficult books, and a sort of inner desire to strike. I always talk about the major chord, but to strike in my reader, or in my audience, or in my loved one, or in my friend, or in the stranger I meet on the street, to strike in them this sort of kinetic opportunity, like you were describing at the minute, this flicker of energy that I think is kindness.
And when you hit your major chord, it's almost always at a personal or intimate level rather than at a societal one. Like the hope that you're willing to share is at a human level, not at a cultural, political, it's down to single people. Is that the kind of optimist you are?
Well, it's certainly the kind of pessimist I am. I am low on hope. The great formulation of hope of our era is Rebecca Solnit's, and she's more optimistic than I am. And I don't mean that necessarily on a planetary level. I think I mean it on a human level. I think the tendency, right now, let's look at it. We must speak freely of this, right? The scale of our cycle of violence, our hunger for violence, the scale of the inequality, our absolute hypocrisy as regards the value of one type of skin versus another, is so startling. It whirs into such immaculate life every time, because of course we have impulse towards kindness and care and ingenuity and invention as human beings, but it does also appear that we have a spin cycle of brutality and barbarism and disregard for our own future and for our own fellow human being that is our superpower. It appears to be the thing we do best. I can't believe we're where we are at the moment in the world. It seems to me that peace, long term, this thing I've obsessed with my whole life, this concept that human beings might educate oneself through atrocity and move toward a path of betterment, the fact that appears to be not only laughable, but actually just irrelevant. We haven't even got time to think about that because of the sheer scale of the violence that's happening in the world. It blows my mind. But also what Solnit posits, and she's right, is that the hope isn't a sort of romantic glaze you put on things in order to stop doing the hard work of it. It's an axe, she says in her new book, it's an axe with which you break down the doors that we've built. And I will lend every fibre of my being to that effort for our generation and the ones that follow. But if you ask me to say what I think is going to happen, I think that human beings are going to continue to hurt one another until the end. And as a result hurt the planet, because it's the same thing. It's a choice. But as you say, that thinking doesn't, I hope it's not morbid, and I hope it's not making my books depressing to read. I hope that it can coexist with this, whatever you would describe my theme, like a sort of deep secular celebration of joy, pain and ecstasy, organically intertwined, the life system of all things. I hope it's not miserable.
No, but it's not for the exact reason that you identified earlier. I think creation is really important. I think the making of things, the making of art, the kind of the sharing of the imaginative and the empathetic, not as an engine for betterment, but just as something in its own right.
I suppose that there's something in the meeting of acceptance of what there is and restlessness, of yearning, of hunger for what we don't yet know, that crystallizes all the things I love most about humanity. I think I increasingly think a lot about gratitude, and a gratitude that doesn't necessarily exclude rage or activism or gruntlement or crossness, whatever, like a sort of implicit, shared, accepted, glowing bafflement at the state of things that doesn't stop us being tetchy, weird, interesting, eccentric people at the same time,
I want to let you go. I'm going to get your second sentence quickly, and then I'll let you run away.
Okay. Well, I was thinking of a terrible pun where I would tell you what my sentence was, and then I'd tell you another one, which was longer, and you'd say, Max Porter has just served a longer sentence.
See, done.
I couldn't workshop the pun quite right, as you can tell.
No, I can feel that it's coming, and don't worry, we're going to hit it.
So what this is this is my ultimate earworm. So if I am blank, and if I am in a traffic jam or in the middle of the night or trying to think of a song to sing my baby to get them to sleep or whatever, the one that always appears, it's absolutely baffling. For some reason, my default song, Private Dancer, Dancing for... I don't know why, but Private Dancer always comes into my head, right? So that's the fact. And then I was telling this story, and I was telling it at a family occasion, and I said, it's really weird, of all the things I'm involved in, my default tune, the thing that always comes to mind is, what's love got to do? And my brother went, well, you've changed your tune.
Oh, Max Porter, I could talk to you for hours. It is such a treat to get to sit and chat to you again.
Oh, that's nice. Sorry I've rambled.
No, you haven't at all.
Clara, cut it all out.
Oh, no, Clara is ruthless. It's going to be a 3-minute episode, and it's going to be sharp.
It's just me going, Private Dancer.
Oh, yeah. No, it's just you singing. That's all we're going with. Max Porter's books are widely available. His music, thankfully, is not. Before we go, a couple more choices from my personal Christmas wish list. And first up, it's the new Michael Cunningham. He's best remembered for The Hours, but to my mind, my favourite book of his is A Home at the End of the World. It's an earlier novel that's this beautiful portrait of a friendship. His newest book is being touted as the first big COVID novel. It's called Day, and it's split across 3 different time frames during the pandemic. I'm not sure what my appetite is for pandemic reading right now, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And my second pick for the Christmas list is Roman Stories by Jhumpa Lahiri. I absolutely adore Lahiri's work, and every time she has a new book out, I'm first in the queue. The new book is a collection of short stories, which she is an absolute master at. That's it for this week's show, and we only have one episode left for 2023 before the year finishes and I lie face down on a beach somewhere. I did happen to notice on the Apple Podcast app the other day that we have 185 ratings. That seems stupidly close to 200. Give us a Christmas present and get us there before the end of the year. Rate, review, and share. Sorry for being that guy. Read This is produced and ruthlessly edited by Clara Ames. Mixing and original compositions by Zoltan Fetcher. Thanks for listening. See you next week.